Hey y'all, this is Katie. Thank you for joining us for this week's Texas Counts Weekly Update. Today is Monday, May 18th. We just opened up the webinar, so we are going to give folks time to hop on the call. We typically start around 12:02, so if you need to grab a drink or get something to eat really quick before we get started, please feel free. But thank you again so much for joining us on Zoom and also on Facebook Live, and we will get started shortly. Thanks, y'all. Okay, let's get started. So again, welcome everyone to this week's Texas Counts Weekly Update. Today is Monday, May 18th, if you can believe it. I am joined by my two fabulous co-host for today's weekly update, and that is Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center, and then Ms. Genesis Sanchez from the NALEO Educational Fund. And my name is Katie Martin Lightfoot, and I work for the Center for Public Policy Priorities. I know many of you join us each week, so thank you again for letting us take over your lunch hour on Monday. But we have the same agenda, of course. Welcome to everyone on the call today. Then Genesis is going to walk us through some 2020 census updates, but also share out some really great outreach content and toolkits that y'all can share with your networks. Then Dr. Valencia will take us through the data and see how Texas is doing in self-response. And then I will share out a Texas Counts road trip update. Thank you to those who have filled out the interest form for that. We'll be talking through a little bit more of the details. And then, of course, as always, we will save plenty of time at the end of this call if you do have any questions. But throughout the course of the call, please use the chat box or the Q&A function if you do have any questions, comments, concerns about anything being covered. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Genesis to get us started, everyone.
Hi everybody, Genesis here. Thanks again for joining us and happy Monday. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Can we go to the next slide, Katie? Thank you so much. So as far as the Census Bureau, there are not a lot of updates to report back. The Bureau has continued to resume their update leave operations. Unfortunately, Texas is not yet on that list. So hopefully within the next few weeks, if not the next week, we'll know more about whether the update leave operations will resume in Texas. And then just as a reminder for those who do have a large update leave operation in their area, please do remember that the Bureau has asked that those households in those areas wait until they receive their materials so as to not undermine the operation. In addition, the Small Business Pulse Survey is ongoing, but some of the results have been published. And there's also, the Bureau has also published a copy of the questionnaire so you can see what kind of questions they ask. So in case someone does receive a survey and they say, hey, I thought I did the census, but I got this other thing, what's the difference? What am I looking at? You can verify some of the questions with them to make sure that they're receiving something legitimate. And then some of the results have also already been published, so you can visit them at that link. Next slide, please. Thanks, Katie. The Census Bureau also recently published a parent caregiver toolkit as part of their statistics in schools. So the idea behind these toolkits is that they kind of provide tips, best practices, and instruction on how to use and adapt all the activities and resources they have for at-home use. So if you do have a large population in your network or in your outreach that needs a little bit more help with some of the toolkits that have already been published, feel free to send them here. I'll also drop the link inside of the chat as well. Next slide. So I'm not sure how many of you know, but May is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. So our partners over at the National Council of Asian and Pacific Americans has created a toolkit, which is linked here as well. Tomorrow, for example, they have a tweet prepared for folks who want to join in or potentially share. So I'll be sure to drop that in the chat as well. And then we know a few folks have asked us previously for a fact sheet around or some kind of quick guide around responding without an ID. So Census Counts created their own kind of fact sheet, and Naleo is actually in the process of translating it into Spanish. So once we get that in Spanish, we'll make sure to share it as well. The Census Counts also has a really good internet self-response guide. It's a PowerPoint that you can go through. It's very easy to read and understand. So in case you have folks who say, I want to do it online, but I don't know how, or you're struggling to kind of walk through it with somebody, you have that here as well. So I'll make sure to share that too. And then with that, I also want to kind of put out an informal ask. If there's any material or one-pagers or fact sheets that you need, please let us know. We at Naleo have some capacity to create these. We may have already created them. I know that one of the things about the census world is that there are a lot of materials, and sometimes it's hard to kind of find them through a lot of the different links and the different partners. So if there's anything that you need in particular, feel free to throw it in the chat or send me a message. I'm happy to either look for it for you or bring it up to my team to potentially create something, especially if it's needed in Spanish. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Katie.
Thank you so much, Genesis. And again, Genesis does have an ask. If anyone does have any materials or resources that you might not necessarily have the capacity to create yourselves, please let us know. Again, we want to support you in any way we can while we're getting out the count in Texas. And of course, if you do have any questions around operations or any of the great resources that Genesis shared, please feel free to pop them into the chat box or into the Q&A box. But now I will pass it over to Dr. Lila Valencia, and she'll walk us through some of the self-response data in Texas.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Hope you had a nice weekend. I'm going to be going through the typical data tools that we've been looking at over the last few weeks and giving you just the latest response rates. Katie, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Thank you. So these are all of the links to those tools. That way you're able to kind of go through them on your own during your own time and to share on your social media. Next slide, please. Thanks, Katie. So I wish I had better news to report, but Texas has actually dropped in rankings to 41st. We are now behind New York State. When Texas first started this, we were, when we first started collecting response rate data, the Census Bureau is tracking that, we were at 42nd. And then New York State got hit really, really bad from the COVID pandemic. And we actually passed New York State to move up to 41st. And then we've been moving up. But lately, this has actually started our slip. We have moved from as high, I think, as 38th. Now we're down to 41st. And unfortunately, a lot of the states that are beneath us in terms of response rate are states that have large update leave populations. And the Census Bureau has actually started going into some of those states already in the last couple of weeks. And so I only anticipate that our ranking could actually get worse and worse in the near future. So you'll look here, the US has a response rate, I'm sorry, I have a typo there, of 69.5, but it's 59.5. And Minnesota actually has a response rate of 69.5. They are in first place. And they actually increase like, nearly 10 percentage points or something since the last time we were reporting these data to you. And so they're really, really growing their response rate day after day. Whereas the US daily increase in response rate is about 1 percentage point. So last week when I shared these findings with you, we were at about 53.1, and today we're at 54.1. So that's similar for the US. I think the US was at 58.5 last week when we presented these data to you, and now they're at 59.5. So even though we're kind of, our daily increase is growing with the state, we also started very far behind the state. And so that gap in response rate has actually been increasing. Next slide, please. But the good news is that our Texas counties continue to grow in some areas at a faster rate in terms of response. And so we're seeing really strong response rates from the Texas Population Triangle counties, as well as areas of the Panhandle with Randall, Lubbock County, San Angelo, Taylor, and El Paso all doing really well. We now have 64 counties that have more than 50% plus response rate. So they've passed that important milestone where that they're more than halfway through their enumeration for their housing units. Jackson County actually had the highest daily increase in response, and they actually increased just in one day the amount that it took Texas to increase for half of the week. So they had a 0.5 percentage point increase, and they are northeast of Victoria over in the Gulf Coast area. And then Atlanta, Texas is actually over close to Texarkana, and they had the highest daily increase among Texas cities. Next slide, please. So here is the daily response rate data that I was sharing with you earlier. What we're seeing is that now, Texas is at 54.1% compared to the US at 59.5, but you see that the space between those two blue lines is actually increasing. And in day one, that gap was about 2.9 percentage points, but now we're at day 59 of this self-response time period, and that gap has increased to 5.4 percentage points. It's continued to make our average daily increase drop. We're now down to about 0.7 percentage points across the entire time period, but post-census day average is an increase of about 0.4. But really in the last few days, as you can see by the little orange bars from May 14th through May 16th, that percentage increase has really only been about 0.1 percentage points. So Texas is starting, responses to Texas are sort of trickling in, or they're slowing down kind of to a trickle. And so it's going to be really important that we are able to get a little bit more creative in how we encourage people to continue to respond. Next slide, please. This is the dashboard that the US Census Bureau puts together. And as you can see, Texas is now at 41, right below New York State. And then you can see states like Montana, Vermont, Wyoming, Maine, West Virginia, all states with a lot of update leave have lower response rates than Texas. But like I mentioned, the Census Bureau will be going into those states pretty soon. And so we could expect to see Texas drop if our response rate continues at the rate that we are responding right now. This is a real useful dashboard to share in your social media. You can just kind of, pull it as an image. You can embed it in your website. And it's real easy to share and kind of gives you that nice little competitive comparison between different cities or different counties. So I encourage you to take a look at it and see what you think, if that's something that you'd want to share. We have about 88 million households have responded to the census in the country, and about 6.5% of those, or 6.5 million of those, are Texas households alone. Next slide, please. I also went through and pulled census tract data, the response rates for the census tract data, and then looked at other characteristics. You'll recall that the characteristics that we have available are based on 2010 census tracts, but what I did was I just looked at the census tracts that the response rates use, the 2020 census tracts, only those that match with the 2010 census tracts. And so they have hard to count characteristics, right? Like the percentage that are Hispanic, the percentage that are renters, the percentage that have are living below poverty. And so what I did here for this slide is I pulled all of the census tracts that had at least 50% of their population of Hispanic origin. So 50% or greater. And I looked at the average response rate for those census tracts, and the average response rate was about 30.75. So that's well below the response rate for the state, right? We are at 54.1. There's 1,250 census tracts that match that 50% plus Hispanic population. When I removed all of the ones that were for update leave notification from the Census Bureau, we're left with about 1,171 census tracts that are majority Latino and have less than 20% of their housing units receiving an invitation from the Census Bureau through update leave. The reason I pulled those out is because the Census Bureau is telling us to, have people hold off in those areas until they are doing their field operation as reinstated there. And so I wanted to look to see what, where we can be and where we can go, what can we do? And so when I looked at the response rate for those census tracts without update leave, or at least 20%, less than 20% update leave, and majority Latino, what I found was that their response rate is higher, but it's still lower than the state average. So we're at 47.2% response rate. And so these are the top 20 Hispanic census tracts with the lowest response rates in the state that don't have a majority of update leave delivery. And what you can see is that a lot of them are in either places in the valley, so like Cameron and Hidalgo County. And then we have another set of census tracts that are in the Dallas area and the Harris County area, and then Ector and El Paso in West Texas. And so on the next slide, you can then go into the mapping. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me talk about this first then. So I did a similar exercise for African American census tracts. So I pulled all of the census tracts that had at least 50% or more African American population, looked at their response rate, and their response rate was a little bit higher, 49.9%, but still lower than the state, right? Which is 54.1 today. And these response rates that we're looking at here are actually from May 8th of 2020. So it's like a week old data. But the census tracts that are here, none of them have a significantly high update leave population. So this includes the top 20 African American census tracts with the lowest responses. And so you'll see that there are areas in Dallas, there's areas in Harris County, and then there's going to be areas of East Texas where the lowest responses for African Americans can be found. Then on the next slide is where I go into what you can do with this information, right? So this is a dashboard that the Texas Demographic Center put together. And basically you can go and search for the census tracts that I've just outlined as the lowest responding census tract. And you can pull those up, and I found it easiest to pull them up using the tabular function that's at the bottom of the application. And then once I found it, I zoomed into the selected census tract. And then on the next slide, you can see that the dashboard then provides once you pull down that tabular format, you're able to see the information in terms of a chart. You're able to see that the census tract is responding well below the county, the state, and the US. You're able to see that they received a bilingual invitation, internet first invitation. You're able to see the internet access that this census tract has, and then you're able to get a few other characteristics along with population and other hard to count characteristics. So I encourage you to take a look at the dashboard and the, some of the census tracts with the low response to help you understand sort of what is the struggle that we're facing. And I think for a lot of us, we're thinking like, man, if Update Leave could just come into Texas, like our response rates would really go up. But unfortunately, that's just part of the story in Texas. There's a big subset of census tracts that are in pretty urbanized areas that we can try to reach out to right now. So I encourage you to take a look, and if there's any particular characteristic that you're interested in that you would like to understand better, let me know, and I'll be happy to present a similar analysis to this in the coming weeks. Next week, I'll focus on just the lowest response rates in general and start to not divide by race and ethnicity, but perhaps look at other characteristics that may also be a clue as to the community that we need to make sure that we're reaching out to. And I just want to share that I also looked at Asian majority Asian census tracts, and their average response rate was about 62.6. So the response rate is well over the state's average, right? And so I didn't share those census tracts, but there's definitely particular census tracts. For instance, I noticed a census tract in Tarrant County that had a large proportion of Asian population, and their response rate was about 32%. So if there's a particular community that you're interested in understanding more, and we have those data available, we'll be happy to help you sort of understand where they are, what other challenges or hard to count characteristics they may be experiencing in that census tract and information like that. Next slide, please. And I just want to encourage you to continue to share out this response rate data. The Census Bureau has provided real easy tools to share. The CUNY map also allows you to very easily share response rates, and it really helps to draw attention to whatever the story is that you think is important to your community. If you think that the narrative is, the ongoing pandemic, and you want to share what the response rate is in the area where there's a lot of need for emergency response, a lot of need for health services, then perhaps share around that. Or maybe you live next to a county or next to a city that's performing really well, and you want to challenge your community to respond at their rate, then maybe reach out and tag them in a post and encourage your community to respond at that rate. I believe that it really does draw some interest, generates that friendly competition, and at least in Brazos County and some of the other counties that I've sort of tagged in different social media posts, I find that I see their response rates increasing, with some exceptions. Some of them don't have a very high social media presence, and so they're not able to see that I'm calling them out on Twitter or anything. But I think generally speaking, I do get to see, that increase in response. And so I encourage you to do the same thing, and your competition type best. And maybe, I'm not sure if Katie's going to share this later, but I saw a really cool one from Hidalgo County. They're doing like this Friday Night Lights competition in the Valley that's kind of based around their football teams. And I thought that was a really great idea, and I'm excited to see how that works out in terms of their response rates. And I think that's all I have, Katie, unless there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Lila, for sharing out a lot of really great information. we got a couple of questions in, but Genesis has been amazing and has been responding to them in the chat function. But real quick before we switch gears and start talking about outreach and the road trip, someone asked, can you please explain the meaning of update leave?
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond to that. So update leave is a field operation that the Census Bureau has in place in areas that are mostly very, very rural and sparsely populated. They also tend to have lower internet connectivity, as well as a high proportion of PO boxes. So really the key identifier is that typically these housing units do not have, the typical sort of city street style address that we're used to, where you have the house number, the street, and, the city and zip code and all of that. And so the Census Bureau goes to these places to be able to each of these individual housing units in person, to be able to update that address to their master address file for future censuses, and leaves a questionnaire packet for that housing unit to respond to. And then that housing unit can still respond online or by telephone or mail back that form, but that physical drop of that package and the geocoding of that address and updating their address file is what makes those particular areas distinct. And so the Census Bureau has to physically send out people into the field to do this. And so they have, this was one of the operations that was suspended amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and has been reinstated in other states, but has yet to be reinstated here in Texas. They are anticipating perhaps doing a phased effort in Texas because it's such a large state. But as soon as we hear when Texas, the update leave program in Texas will be reinstated, I'm sure Genesis will be sharing that in one of her operations updates with you all.
Thank you, Lila. There's also another question in the chat. Maria asks, in which ways are update leave areas impacted by responding online? I'm not totally sure what the question, how to answer this question. So but I'll share a little bit more that I think might help. So when people receive the update leave packet, if they are in an update leave area, it's going to be an internet choice packet. So they'll have the opportunity to go online, pop in their census ID, or they're also receiving a paper questionnaire, which they can mail back. The reason that the Census Bureau doesn't want us to have an update leave any update leave area respond online without a census ID is because they still have to do the update part of the operation. So they still are going to have to send out employees to these areas to make sure that they have the address correct, so that they can scan the property to make sure that there aren't other households, other kind of homes that are a part of a property. So that's one thing. And then another thing is that it could potentially, this area will still continue to receive an invitation. So you're going to get a lot of confused households, right? Who'll say, well, I already did it, but the Bureau will continue to drop off some kind of questionnaire for them. So that's the reason that they kind of want us to hold off on having folks respond online without an ID, even though they may have a city style address.
I guess the only thing I would add is just that if the internet response could affect them if they were to respond online without a response ID, and the Census Bureau was not able to locate them by the description they provided of their home. So for instance, if you try to respond with a non-response ID, you have to add additional descriptions about where, which one is your housing unit, at this intersection. And if the Census Bureau were unable to locate that, they might ask that housing unit to retake the census. And so that's why they're really asking people to hold off too, like Genesis mentioned. But that's one way where responding online or the internet response could affect update leave, is that if they go on and they take it and the Census Bureau is not able to locate them based on their description, they might have to do it all over again.
Thank you, Lila and Genesis. And as a reminder, last week, Genesis did a really great overview of the update leave and what that looks like. And so we'll include last week's slides in this week's kind of wrap up email. In addition to that, if you are curious if your area does have any update leave, the Census Bureau and the CUNY map both have an overlay that will show you where those update leave areas are as well. And I believe that's maybe all of our questions right now. But again, if you have any, pop them in, we'll make sure we get them answered. But if we're going to go ahead and switch gears and talk about the virtual census road trip. And I remember, well, I'm sure you remember last week that we talked through some of the details of what the road trip is, but I want to iron some of those out with folks on the call today. And so as a reminder, we're virtually visiting all regions of Texas to bring awareness to the census, but also celebrate what makes each region in Texas unique. And so the goal of the road trip is to really increase that self-response rates across Texas. Lila shared some pretty scary statistics in terms of where we're at in self-responding in Texas. And we as Texans know how important it is to make sure everyone is counted on the 2020 census. And so there is definitely a challenge before us to increase that self-response rate. But I think we're game. I think we're ready to really do another big push around getting folks counted. And so our goal again is to virtually visit all regions in Texas to bring awareness to the census, but also celebrate what makes each of these regions really unique. So on this road trip, we'll be elevating local trusted voices to have a Texas-sized platform for Get Out the Count efforts, as well as sharing fun content from their region during that week. And so again, we really want to be celebrating what makes Texans Texans by exploring the diversity of our state and the amazing people that live here as well. And so I know that we walked through this last week, but again, I wanted to share a little bit more details about what this week of organized fun is actually going to look like. So the basics, again, we're going to be highlighting different regions each day of the week. We will be lifting up local trusted voices who will lead and share Get Out the Count, as well as fun content to their regions, as well as the state of Texas. We as Texans will be tuning in and promoting the amazing work that's happening in that region, but we'll also be having a little bit of a friendly competition between regions to get self-response up. As Lila shared it in her section, sometimes that competition piece is really helpful, whether we're talking about football in Texas or maybe different competing counties. But again, all in good fun to get out the count. So you might be wondering, what are these regions? And so as a reminder, we know Texas is a really, really big state. We have 254 counties. And so we did our best to kind of carve up our state in a way that we could make this week work. We know that the regions might not be perfect, but again, we really hope that you'll be able to participate in this road trip and have some regional pride. And so those 5 regions, so for the 5 days of the week, will be 1, West Texas and the Panhandle, 2, Gulf Coast and East Texas, 3, Central Texas and the Hill Country, 4, North Texas, and then last but not least, South Texas and the RGV. So these slides literally have all of the counties' names on them. I promise we'll share these with you so you can identify kind of what team you're going to be part of for this process. And so of course, these are our West Texas and Panhandle counties. Here are our Gulf Coast and East Texas counties, our Central Texas and Hill Country, North Texas, and then the South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley. Again, we'll make sure that we share these out with you so you know kind of what day of the week you'll be on, who your teammates will be to help get out the count in your region. So in terms of what this week is actually going to look like, let's talk about what this week of celebration and Get Out the Count will look like. And I divided it into 3 different buckets. And so that first bucket is kind of what Texas Counts is leading. So Texas Counts will curate a day of programming that features local trusted voices that are leading the content. So what does that mean? So we are focusing on North Texas that day. The morning of, we are going to be having a big kickoff virtual rally where we're inviting voices and leaders from that region to talk about, 1, why the census is so important to them, and 2, why their region is so special and unique. And so this is a way to really get folks who are engaging in these Get Out the Count efforts kind of up to speed, but also a celebration for the day's events. Then we will do between 3 to 5 different programmed events under the Texas Counts umbrella. So what exactly does that mean? And so I know that we have all sat in on a lot of webinars, a lot of trainings around the census, and sometimes they might start to blur together a little bit. And so we're trying to be a little bit more fun and creative when we think about what kind of content we'll be sharing out this week. And so our goal really is to have fun and engaging programming that we can promote statewide. So what do I mean by this? Let's think about cultural celebrations. What food in your region is unique? The music, dance, art, nature, the stories of the people in your region, celebrating the diversity of your region. And so instead of just a good old call to action, hey, fill out the census, let's go into someone's kitchen and learn about how to make a specific recipe that's regionally specific, and have a wonderful person kind of sharing, opening their kitchen to us and talking about, 1, how to make this amazing food, but 2, also promoting the census and having conversations around why it's so important to be counted. So again, don't think that we're just going to be sitting in on webinars and trainings all day. We're going to try and make this content more fun and engaging, so you can really learn and about the other regions in Texas, but also hopefully learn some skills or some new things from folks across the state. So with this, again, we'll talk a little bit about the interest form in a second, but we want to make sure that we really are highlighting local voices in your regions. And so if there is someone in mind, like a local musician or a dance group or an artist, or if you have just beautiful state parks in your region, please let us know, because these are the types of stories and content that we want to lift up. So it really is like a traditional road trip where we're exploring different cultures and diversity. In terms of local trusted voices, and so I know on Census Day, we were all promoting filling out the 2020 Census Questionnaire. And this is exactly what we want to do in our regions. So it is a day of action. So trusted voices will lead Get Out the Count efforts in your communities, again, very similar to Census Day. And so this is kind of the unlimited efforts. And so meaning, yes, we'll be having very Texas Count specific programming throughout the day, but this is also up to that region to really be promoting the census and folks in their community to be sharing out information about how to fill out the form. So again, trusted voices on the ground will be creating and leading content that meets the needs of your target audiences. So if we're thinking about local in-person community tactics, maybe that's going through neighborhoods with some sidewalk chalk and writing reminders to fill out the census. Maybe that's a phone bank where you have different community organizations calling folks across your city, your county to fill out the census form. Maybe that's setting up shop at an essential location and handing out flyers or putting some pamphlets up. Again, this doesn't all have to be virtual. We can also think about how we can reach folks in our communities, at their homes, at essential locations. But of course, we can still be hosting virtual Get Out the Count efforts as well. And so again, this is a big push of kind of a Census Day. That's why we've been calling it Census Day 2.0, where we really are wanting folks, again, to just be using as many ways possible that they can to promote the census. I know many of you have had ideas of maybe, hey, I'm thinking about doing a phone bank, or hey, we're thinking about doing a virtual event. this is the week that you should be having those events and hosting those events, because again, we're trying to have that really big collective push in our state again. And then last but not least, of course, is social media. During this time, folks across Texas will be sharing Get Out the Count content throughout the week. So we will be creating region-specific toolkits. So thinking about different talking points, graphics, one, to promote the census, but two, of course, to make them a little bit more individualized to your specific region. We'll also be having shared hashtags, graphics, promos, and regional calls to action. So again, in addition to all of this work we're doing, we'll also be making sure that we're all on the same message. We're sharing the same content, so we have a really strong, robust, unified effort. And then the goal, of course, throughout the course of this week is to just have a week of really heavy promotion by influencers and folks in our community about why it's so important to fill out the census. And so I hope this kind of gives you a little bit more of an idea of what this week is going to look like. I know we haven't necessarily kind of filled in the actual schedule or day to day, but this is what we're going to be doing moving forward. And then just kind of bringing us all together. Why are we even doing this? Of course, we know that every Texan in our states counts, and we have a lot of work to do, but we also know that this work can be tiring and exhausting and sharing the same messaging. And so we're hoping this adds a little bit of fun and an opportunity to be creative in these Get Out the Count efforts. And again, we're really trying to build that census day level momentum to get all households in our state to respond. In terms of next steps, I shared some last week, and hopefully we kind of checked off what we needed to share with you. But our assignments for you is one, a more detailed weekly and daily schedule. Again, we're planning to have this event in June. And so later this week, we'll be sharing out exactly what week in June that is, as well as what week your region will be highlighted and featured. In addition to that, we will also start reaching out to regional trusted voices. So again, we cannot do this work without you, and we want to make sure that we're engaging you in this process because you know your communities best. And so with that, please know that we will be reaching out very soon and engaging folks on the ground. In terms of your assignments for next week, if you haven't already, please fill out the interest form. I will say it's a little long, but none of the questions or responses are required, but we are trying to just get a little bit more information about who you are, where you're at, what are the communities you're serving, but also what ideas do you have to really promote the 2020 census through this road trip. And then your other assignment is to make sure that you're checking your email. So be on the lookout for materials to promote the road trip, but also be on the lookout. You might be getting an ask to get involved in this process. So the link is there for the interest form as well as down here if you want to fill it in. But again, lots of excitement, really excited. We have a lot of people on today's call, which is really exciting and wonderful. And I really hope that all of you will be able to be part of this road trip with us. And as always, you know that we have these weekly update calls every Monday at 12 p.m. Central. We'll continue having these weekly to kind of share out what the operations are looking like, what the self-response data is, but also big updates when it comes to the road trip as we get closer to the road trip in June. But now I want to open it up. I know that we've potentially gotten a couple of questions in. And then if you have any questions about operations, self-response data, or the road trip, go ahead and pop those in now. And again, if you are interested in joining us, here is the link to the interest form. And then just another quick update in terms of what our weekly updates are going to look like going forward. I am officially going to be putting a password or a passcode on them just to increase security. So I've made it really easy, and the passcode is just Texas with an uppercase T. So I will stop talking and give folks time to pop in their questions into the chat and Q&A box, and we'll get to answering them. Thanks, everyone.
Katie. Hey, so we have some questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and field them to you. The first is from Willie. He says, so hold on. So hold off on which types of outreach. We are promoting calls to Latino members of our congregations to assist in census counts. I think this question popped up kind of in the beginning of what you were sharing. I don't know if you know what this is in reference to.
Sure. I'm going to try and answer your question, Willie, and please tell me if I'm not answering it, and we can follow up with an email. But definitely, if you already are having outreach plans in place, continue pumping that message out if you are willing and able to do it. But if you also had some ideas for events you were wanting to host kind of up your sleeve, this week in June will be a great time to do it, because again, if all of us are leading events and sharing messaging during this week, we really will have that collective impact of raising the self-response rate in Texas. So again, if you are still doing outreach to folks, keep doing it. But if you are wanting to kind of host something or have some ideas that you'd like to do in the near distant future, that this week in June will be a really great time to do that.
Yeah, so then Willie follows up. So Willie, you're asking about the street address and ID for online. Are you referring to what we were chatting about before Katie jumped on in regards to the update leave operation? And then while Willie responds, Rafael asked about dates. I don't know if you want to share again what dates you're thinking of, Katie, or just a week.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be mid-June. We are finalizing the exact week this week, so be looking for an official communication from us to share out when we'll be doing this. But we do know that planning takes time, and we've kind of been doing our part in planning things, but y'all need time to also think about events or content that you'd like to be sharing. So it will be happening in mid-June, and we will let you know ASAP, definitely before midweek this week.
Awesome, thank you, Katie. So Willie responded yes about holding off if people don't have their ID. So yes, the Census Bureau has asked us for those folks who do live in those densely populated update leave, well, not densely populated, but those big update leave tracts, to, if they haven't received a material, and let's say that you know that they live at a PO box, they may have already expressed to you, well, I haven't received anything. We do want them to hold off, because again, it does complicate things for the Census Bureau, and the Census Bureau is still going to go out and knock on these doors. So they might receive a packet twice. They may have to do it all over again. So just keep that in mind as you're reaching out to these populations, and verifying kind of where your congregations are to see if they do land in an update leave region. And then a follow-up question from Dennis. Will we meet next week? It's a Memorial Day holiday. That is a great question, Dennis. I don't know that we have an answer to that. Katie, maybe this might be a good time for a break, but I'm not sure.
Yes, that is a really good question, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. We definitely won't be meeting next Monday. Very good point. But maybe we'll think about if we'll do a break that week or if we'll plan on resuming. Maybe we'll do a Tuesday that week, but we'll get back to you. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, good question.
And I think that's it. So Rafael asked, what is the current message for Facebook or over the phone? Could you elaborate on this question a little bit more, Rafael? We'll give him a minute, everybody. Where are we with Census 2020 if they haven't filed? So as Katie shared, we still want to continue to, push self-response, and the message still kind of remains the same. The census is still as important as ever. And especially in light of COVID, the census data has given us an opportunity to really drive where resources are most impactful. If you take a look at, I know many of you don't sit around and read, the acts that Congress has passed, but in the CARES Act and in the HEROES Act, you actually see exactly where they say census data will determine when and where we will make some of these decisions. And so continuing in that line of messaging, even if, again, I want to clarify that even if you do have a large update lead population in your area, that doesn't mean that you should stop your outreach or put a damper on it. It's still really, really important, right? Because the more outreach you do now, when those operations are continued and when they do get their form, then folks are going to feel empowered and ready to fill it out, return it, and hopefully we see a bump in response rates. I don't know if Katie or Lila want to add anything here.
This is Katie. No, Genesis, I think you covered it well in your response. And we'll also in this kind of, I've started doing it, but in our recap for today's presentation, I'll share out some messaging ideas, and then also I believe most of y'all are on our newsletter list, and we typically share out just messaging and toolkits that you can promote during this time as well. So we'll make sure that you do have content. And then back to Genesis's point, even if you do have areas of update leave, again, as Lila said, that doesn't necessarily tell the whole story in terms of why our self-response numbers aren't quite where we would like them to be. So we definitely want to continue promoting folks in our communities to fill out the census.
All right, I think those are all the questions, Katie. Do you want to wrap us up?
Yes, thanks, Genesis. Well, once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this week's Texas Counts weekly update call. Thank you, Dennis, so much for bringing to our attention that next week is Memorial Day. And so we will get back to folks ASAP about what a reschedule might look like for this call. But again, please be on the lookout for more information about the road trip, and then fill out the interest form if you haven't already. And we look forward to connecting with everyone very soon, but hope everyone has a wonderful week, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, everyone.